An analysis of JavaScript. The topics to be discussed in this presentation include the history of JavaScript, syntax and semantics, uses of the language, standardization, and issues with the language. In April of 1995, Brandon Ike joined Netscape with intentions of embedding something similar to the Scheme language into Netscape's browser. His group wanted to create a glue language for the web designers who were building web content with images, plugins, and Java applets. The problem they addressed was the text-heavy static web pages that Netscape wanted to add interactivity and dynamic ability to. Netscape later informed Brandon Ike that the project should be similar to Java rather than Scheme. Within 6 months, the name of the project had changed. It was initially called Mocha, and then it was changed to LiveScript due to the fact that the web pages seemed to come alive. And then JavaScript was adopted due to the momentum of Java at the time. And then later in 1997, it was changed to EMCA script due to the need for standardization. Here we have a sample Netscape web page. Nothing really spectacular about it here. Brandon Knight received his bachelor's degree in mathematics and computer science from Santa Clara University, and then he received his master's degree in 1986 from the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign. Some of the key features of JavaScript include that it is commonly referred to as what's known as a multi-paradigm language, which means it possesses features of object-oriented, imperative, and functional languages. JavaScript has great dynamic ability when running in runtime. This is due to the fact that it is weakly typed, it's dynamically bound, it's prototype-based object-oriented inheritance, its functions and objects have properties, and it uses dot notation to access properties, much as in Java where O.x, where x would be a property of O object. Here's an overview of the DOM model, and this is the concept behind JavaScript, is that we want to manipulate these objects from the client side rather than waiting for a server refresh. So this increases performance, increases user experience, and it adds the dynamic ability to the web pages. JavaScript features 5 primitive data types, including undefined, null, boolean, number, and string. Those primitive data types are objects in JavaScript, along with the other built-in objects of the language, which include object, function, array, string, boolean, number, math, date, regular expression, JSON, and error objects. Despite the vast differences of JavaScript and Java, the syntax is actually somewhat similar, and this was one of the goals in the development of the language. JavaScript is case sensitive. It features what is known as semicolon insertion. The programmer should be very careful to always insert a semicolon where necessary, because when a program contains a token that's not allowed, then a semicolon is inserted if there's a line break at that point, or the unexpected token was a closing brace, and this can lead to unexpected results and failed JavaScript programs. Comments are similar to C++ and Java, with double slashes for single line comments and slash asterisk for multi-line comments. Unlike Java, JavaScript variables are all declared the same way by declaring var. JavaScript also features anonymous and named functions. The operators in JavaScript are typical to what you would expect in most programming languages. with the exception of the addition operator, which is overloaded for string concatenation and arithmetic. This can be tricky if a programmer unknowingly adds a number and a string together and gets unexpected results. It's also worth noting that the math object handles exponents and square roots, so there's not actual exponent operator as a lot of other programming languages feature. Here we have a very simple JavaScript program. We can see inside of the HTML tags, the script tags let the page know that this is JavaScript. We have a multi-line comment. Then we have two vars declared. One we can see is a number, the other is an array. Then we have a function named push, which accepts an element. And what this does is adds that element to the next index in the array. So where is JavaScript used at? JavaScript is primarily used in web development for DOM manipulation. This is the document object model, and this is the primary reason that JavaScript was developed in the first place. JavaScript has also found its place among game development, especially web game development, and it's also found a place in mobile development, namely the iOS, which is the operating system for iPhone. Some of the specific uses of JavaScript in web design include easily adding interactive navigation and menu controls to a site. This can be seen on sites such as Amazon and Yahoo. When you mouse over or hover over an arrow key and a submenu pops up. JavaScript can fire events on mouse over by clicking, key pressing. It's great for dynamically hiding or showing elements at runtime. Usually in HTML, a div tag can be hidden or shown using JavaScript. This is great, for example, in Amazon when you hover over a book and a description pops up on the page. And it's also very useful in client-side validation for web forms to ensure that correct data has been entered. And here is an example of a site using JavaScript navigation where the user hovers over a menu item and a submenu pops up. It's very user-friendly and it's fast, and that's one of the reasons JavaScript is favored so much in web development. Here we have just a couple sample games here that have been remade using JavaScript online. Space Invaders, Doom. So it's a pretty popular game for remaking web game, along with Flash. It's along the lines of Flash for game development. So with all of these great things about JavaScript, there must be a few problems. And one of these is the lack of debugging software. I know Firefox has a utility called Firebug, which I hear is great for debugging JavaScript. If you program JavaScript, you'll find out quick that it's usually an all or nothing program success, meaning all of your JavaScript executes or nothing executes, and it's very hard to find the source of the problem. Programmers should also remember that JavaScript is only an option for browsers, not a requirement. So it is possible for computers to have their browsers JavaScript disabled, and this presents a problem because the page will be rendered differently depending on how the programmer handles that option. It's also important to remember that multiple platforms, meaning Internet Explorer, Firefox, Opera, Safari, all the different types of browsers will take different versions of the same code. So sometimes you may have to write 4 or 5 different versions of the same code to satisfy those multiple browsers. JavaScript features several popular libraries and frameworks for making JavaScript programming much easier, and jQuery is one I have personal experience with. It's one of the most popular and most supported libraries. It drastically reduces the amount of code needed. It provides an easier way to access the DOM elements on the page, and it's very easy to implement. You only need to import the jQuery file and reference it in your page, and you can start coding jQuery from there. Here we have a great example of one way that jQuery can condense code as compared to JavaScript. These two code samples do the exact same thing. As you can see on the JavaScript side, we actually have to add an event listener to the document object to call a function, whereas on the jQuery side, the $sign is a property of jQuery, and once that page is ready, then the function executes. Another popular framework actually for JavaScript is AJAX, which stands for Asynchronous JavaScript and XML. And what this does is provide server communication to an application so a web page can stay consistent while doing server exchanges behind the scenes. What this does is it maintains consistency on the web page. The web page to the user consistently stays on page while only small parts of the web page are refreshed. And so this increases the user experience because the user doesn't have to wait for a server refresh each time one of the DOM elements are acted upon. So in conclusion, we can see that JavaScript increases the interaction of a web page. It has great libraries for utilization, great plugins. It is a multi-paradigm language. It incorporates weak typing and dynamic binding. So if you ever have to do any type of web development, I strongly emphasize that you should utilize JavaScript to get the most out of your web application for user experience and resource control. Thank you for your time.